Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say. And in this video, I got a bunch more stories, like I always say, from all over the place. We have a viewer story, a story from Costa Rica, a story from Washington. We also have a story about a cave and a possible Mandela effect. So, definitely pull up a stump, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. First of all, sorry for my English. I live in Costa Rica, in a rural indigenous community. I'm not really too close to my heritage, but I do like to go deep into the mountains near my home. When I was little, my grandma told me a story that I really liked about the voice of the old man. It's a voice that you could only hear when you were really deep in the forest. It's a spirit that protected my ancestors when they would run to the mountains from the Spanish colonials. If it calls you by your name, you are not supposed to follow the voice because it's going to make you lost in the forest, but you can't ignore it because the spirit will get angry, so you need to say, "I know my way," in my people's language. So, when I was 16, I used to go with my friend to camp in the forest. It was fun, and we brought some beers, hidden of course, and we camp near a large-ass tree called the 10 Arms Tree. It's called that because you need 5 people to hold their hands to go all the way around it. Anyway, one day when we were going there in silence, just enjoying the place, and suddenly I hear someone call me by my name in a weird voice. I thought that it was my imagination, and then I heard it again, and we all stopped to look to each other. I say, "Did anyone call me?" And I heard again. Each one of us only heard their own names being called, so we started to freak out. At first, the voice sounded really far away, but since we didn't follow it or respond to it, it began to sound a lot closer. We even started running back, but the voice kept following us, and the trees started to move like a strong wind were hitting them. But then I remembered the story and started yelling, "I know my way, I know my way," in my people's language, and immediately the voice went away and the trees stopped moving. We were all really, really scared, but we decided that since we're out there, we may as well still camp. The next day, when we went back to the town, the first thing I did was go to my grandma's house and I told her what happened. She was really worried, but also happy that I remembered how to calm the spirit. This story was sent in to me by Stacy, so thank you for sending in your story, Stacy, and I will try my best to do it justice. Hi, I'm writing from mid-northern Ohio, near Lake Erie, USA. I've had some real paranormal experiences, and tonight I'll share one with you. The house I grew up in was haunted by an old woman named Hazel Morley. She died in the early 1980s, leaving her 2-story 1920s house in a neglected condition. I was only 4 or 5 years old when we moved in, and I had not yet started kindergarten. My dad was young, healthy, and gung-ho back then, with the energy to tackle basic home renovations and maintenance in exchange for a moderately priced nice home with hardwood floors, 3 spacious city lots, and a nice residential neighborhood on a boulevard-type residential street with a dead end and had an alleyway behind the house. It had a farmland behind it at the edge of town. There was woods and railroad tracks. It was walkable distance to school, my grandma's and great-aunt's house. It also had a detached 2-car garage. In short, it was the perfect place for a starting family to raise 2 kids. I had a younger sister, younger by 3 years. She was the precious one, and for some reason I was the scapegoat. For reasons that were unknown to me at the time, my father had a fun and loving side, but also a hair-trigger temper towards me. I didn't ever understand my parents' tender love and preference for my sister growing up. It's the same to this day, with me estranged and quite happy relationship with my sister and their 2 grandkids. I grew up a sullen, frightened, quiet child with delicate nerves and a very bright, vivid imagination and a rich inner life. I was always a pretty girl and got the wrong kind of attention for an introvert. People frightened me, and I preferred imaginary monsters and fairies as my friends and playmates instead. At least they didn't bully or harm me. I wrote books about my critters starting in the 1st grade. Then I sewed them out of fur and pom-poms and felt and pipe cleaners that I bought with babysitting money. This was about 30 to 40 years ago. My critters were my friends and my beloved children. I had no love or use for human dolls like Barbie, whom I tore apart and abused in rages, acting out my anger toward my parents. It took decades of therapy to work out my childhood and realize that not all parents are good people, and that it wasn't my fault. To listeners, I can't emphasize enough of the importance of mental health and getting help and the right medications. There is no shame in feeling better and living a more normal and happier life, free from bad stuff. Surrounding yourself with good people and good activities helps immensely. For my whole life, I've suffered from social anxiety, PTSD, and panic attacks. Medication helps. So does listening to soothing tales of the strange, dark, and mysterious genre, which is why I love your channel. Aw, thank you. But enough about my personal history. It ties into the haunted house. Given my background, I had trouble sleeping. I'm an insomniac and a night owl to this day. I even peed the bed occasionally until I was about 11 years old because I was too afraid to get up in the dark. But there was a reason for my extreme fear beyond my parents. My mom was a high-strung and suspicious personality who had mental health issues of her own from her childhood and psychological, financial, and verbal abuse from my dad. So she often waited at the bottom of the stairs to make sure that we were asleep and not talking. She snuck up to check on us, and to make sure that we were sleeping, I was good at faking. I know because I got busted sometimes for sneaking food upstairs. She was the paranoid type who tiptoed around and spied on me, then busted and grounded me for petty infractions. But a lot of the time, it wasn't actually my mom. The wooden floorboards creaked slowly and quietly in the middle of the night as my heart raced and tears fell from my sleeping eyes. I cried out, "Mom," several times with no answer, so I'm sure it wasn't her. Once she came only halfway up the creaky old wood stairs and then stopped. I cried out, "Mom?" No response. I was convinced I was going to bust her sneaking, so I got out of bed, but no one was there. I went downstairs, but she wasn't there either. I heard her down in the basement talking to my dad. This made me very confused. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, I had left my favorite furry green monster, Professor Pierre, laying on my pillow. In the afternoon, I went up to my room after school while my sister played outside. My mom and dad weren't home. Professor Pierre was nowhere to be found. I looked under my covers, I pulled out my bed from the wall and crawled under my bed. There was no sign of him. I asked my mom about him later. She denied doing anything to him. After combing the blue-green carpet with my fingers, there were clumps of shredded green fur, like he had had clumps torn out of him. Supposedly, no one touched or even saw him. This broke my heart, as he was my closest friend and ally. I began weeping uncontrollably and laid on my bed. Suddenly, the room started shaking a bit. The old brass doorknob began rattling and my door slammed shut. I hid under my covers and cried for what seemed like hours. So, I hope I did your story justice, Stacy, and thank you for sending it to me. When I was in the 8th grade, my friends and I decided to skip school and leave during lunch. Our escape was flawless, of course, being well-practiced little deviants. If you were to go into the first floor bathroom, there was a supply closet that you could card pretty easily. Through the closet is a connecting door which leads to the auditorium, and it's usually empty, so then we ran through it and there was an exit door to freedom. So anyways, we've run across the schoolyard, we're across the street, and we're into the trees beyond. This is rural southern Virginia, near the Tennessee border. Our town didn't have sidewalks, if that tells you anything. We know the way to a trail to a local swimming hole / waterfall / cave, and we figure that we'll go hang out there and maybe go for a swim. So we're there at the waterfall, and we're doing general childhood tomfoolery, shoving each other into the water, having lightsaber duels with sticks, etc. I get the great idea to go into the cave. My friends are too scared, all of our parents having warned us not to go into the cavern because we could slip into a crack and nobody ever sees you again. There was a high school kid a couple years before who had gone into the cavern, and he fell into the water at the bottom, and he got sucked into an underground cave. At least, that's what everyone figures happened anyways. To his friends, he just went into the water, and he was never seen again, just like we got warned. Me, being a humongous dumbass, ignored this advice and went into the cavern. I was very careful to stay near the mouth of the cave, and I slid on my butt so I wouldn't slip. My friends are begging me to stop going further, but I'm getting a rush from being a big Billy badass. Of course, mentally, I'm terrified. I didn't understand how dark it was in the cave. This was around 2000, so we didn't exactly have phones or anything to use as a light. I had a Bic lighter for firecrackers, but that had been in the water and was now too wet to light. Just as I decided to change my mind and started scooting myself back up to the top, my feet can't find the traction to move me up, and instead I start slipping further down. I'm screaming for help, but none of them are about to slide down in there because they're not dumbasses like me. I panic and I try to flip onto my belly and scramble up that way, but while I'm flipping, I just lose all control and sloop down the side of the rock and into the water below. I will never forget how my heart felt when I hit the water. Not only was it ice cold and pitch black, but I was already freaking out. I'm not ashamed to admit that I voided my bowels. All I could think about was that high school kid and how I was going to get sucked down into an undercurrent into a cave, and I thought about how my mom would miss me, and I started to cry. I remember my head going under the water and my body moving down really fast. It must have been the undercurrent, I thought. Basically, I resigned myself to death. I stopped holding my breath and I breathed in the water. I must have passed out because the next thing I remember, I was being pulled out of the swimming hole by my friends on the outside of the cave. Near as I can tell, I was sucked through the bottom and went through some channel just to come out the other side safe. I threw up river water and my lungs burned worse than they ever have even to this day. I coughed for what must have been 45 minutes off and on while I sat there and shivered and pulled myself together. It was a while before I was calm enough to notice that my friends are all dressed differently than they were when I went under. I asked them if they had changed their clothes or something, but they acted like they had no clue what I was talking about. Everything just seemed kind of weirdly bright, too. The colors of the woods and the rocks and the water were all so much more vibrant and slightly different shades than I had remembered. The next day, I returned to school after having told my parents absolutely nothing about this. I asked about the high school kid who died, and nobody knew what the hell I was talking about. I noticed things that were different too. The school mascot and the team colors were different. And one of the weirder things was that my school books looked different too. Some were smaller than before, and a couple other ones were much bigger. My clothes at home were different as well. In particular, I had a Guns and Roses shirt that was my dad's, but now it said Guns N' Roses with the apostrophe with the N. Just little things like that I remember being different before I fell into the water. Years later, of course, I learned about the Mandela effect, and obviously I now believe that when I went into the water, I was sucked through to some different reality that is mildly different than my original one. This causes me a lot of distress, but I don't tell anybody about it. I'm in my 30s now, and only now am I able to even tell anybody, and it's anonymously. Honestly, I feel like this whole thing is just me admitting to myself that this did happen. The biggest difference between the world I'm in now versus the world I was in before was that the world I was in before seemed very safe. I have felt a strong difference in just the general tone of this one. I don't know if the US was involved in something called the Gulf War because I had never once heard of that. Of course, it could have been because I was a preteen, but I don't know. 9/11 happened not long after, and that's when I learned a lot about new differences. For example, I learned how the Taliban used to be allies fighting the Soviets before the Soviet Union collapsed. As far as I understood it, as of 1999 in my world, the Soviet Union was still around, and I remember hearing my parents talk about how they're going to take over the whole Middle East. And I knew about Russia being seen as the world's bad guys. Like, there were still movies like Red Dawn and stuff like that. I understood there was a concern about Russia controlling the world's oil supply, which was the actual plot of the third Rambo movie. I remember watching it on TV, and it was about Rambo fighting the Russian oil supply, not about Rambo helping the Mujahideen. I know this sounds really stupid, but I was a kid. Most of what I knew about the world came from movies, I admit, but I'm positive that the Soviet Union was a world power when I went into the water. So before I went into the water, the tone was like what we now know as the Cold War. The biggest fear was that Russia would take control of the Middle East and become unstoppable. But even though that was a scary thing to think about, it didn't really feel as bad because there was still a plot. It made sense. The world now feels like chaos. Almost nothing makes sense here. I think it made sense before. America and the West in general were very unified in opposition to the Soviet Union. And to be honest, we were probably headed for a World War III, but at least it was the natural progression of things. Now here there's all this conflict, many different countries fighting and stuff that we have now. It doesn't feel like anything is real. I think I left the ordered world and entered into some chaos variant. I think we're all in the chaos world right now. Anyway, that's all I have, but I've been thinking that maybe this weekend I'll drive down there and go back to the cavern to see what it's like. I don't think I want to go into the cavern, but I'll at least check it out. I don't know. Part of me still thinks in the back of my head that if I go into the water again, I'll come back out in the real world, or at least my world. Both worlds could be real, I guess. When I was in elementary school, there was an annual camping trip for every class, so each class got to essentially pick their campground off of a designated list and then go camp there. All places were usually within 3 to 4 hours of the school, as I remember. This is in Washington State, so they were all pretty heavily forested in the areas they were in. I think maybe it was like a lottery system. If several classes wanted the same spot, they would just randomly pick one. But anywho, it was on the last week, or maybe the week before last, of school. Just kind of a you done good kids type of reward. Well, that's what I always figured anyways. I'm not entirely sure because we still had to meet up a couple of times a day to learn about nature and do assignments. I haven't met anyone else whose schools did this, so I guess it's just unusual. So 4th grade is finishing up, and it's almost camping time. My class friends and I are all getting excited about this. We're talking about maybe revisiting this camp that had a sweet layout that was next to a lake, so we could go fishing if we wanted. I think maybe there was a little zip line there too, if the water had warmed enough. Just little kid things that you're excited for. We end up getting shafted on the fix though, and we don't get any place that we've been to before. We end up going to this place, of which I will never return to, called the Puffer Boot Lodge. So I showed up to school early Monday morning, and everyone was loading on their designated buses with all their gear. This place had cabins, so we didn't have to bring tents along. We left around the time that school's supposed to start, so around 8:30 or 9 o'clock, depending on where you are. The only adults on the trip, besides the teacher and the bus driver, who wasn't staying, were a few volunteer parents. That year, there were 3 moms, I can't remember whose, and Brandon, plus my friend Jeff's fathers. There was more than 20, but less than 30 kids in the class, I think. And we were on that bus for about 3 hours before we finally rolled in. He dropped us off, and a teacher verified his return date of the same time, Friday morning, unless there was a change of plans. So we have no vehicles out here, but I'm a little kid, so this was no concern of mine. This is before everyone had cell phones too, but the lodge had a landline for any kind of emergency or any kind of calls for assistance. The place seemed pretty legit. It was a nice lodge with a kitchen, so the whole class could meet up for meals and whatnot. There was a couple of ping pong tables, if I remember right, and a foosball table in there too. There were maybe 10 cabins, and the lodge was pretty big, so that place could have accommodated quite a few more people, and we only ended up using 4 of the cabins, 2 for the boys and 2 for the girls. They had bunk beds, so it was easy to fit us all in those. So we get all our stuff unpacked, and we argue over who gets the top bunk. You know how it goes. I ended up losing a game of rock, paper, scissors, or however we decided, so I'm on the bottom, next to one of the cabin's 4 windows. There's 1 window on each side of the cabin, 2 of which are in the front and back doors. The cabins are all unique, as I recall though. I think 1 didn't even have windows, and some of them had more than 4. The bathroom shower place was separate from the cabins, located basically in the center of the camp, in between where our cabin and the girls' cabins were. It's lunchtime by now, so everyone convenes in the lodge for some sandwiches, and our teacher announces that we're all going to go on a hike after lunch. All the students are given these worksheets, and we're to document 2 types of flowers and 2 types of animals or insects, and a few more things our teacher wanted us to look out for. We had to try and draw them, and then write a little description about it, and what have you. So, the hike begins. It seems like we're mainly traveling uphill. The parents are helping keep an eye on the children, as we'd stop every 10 minutes or so, and would roam a little bit off the trail to inspect possible finds. Everything goes according to plan. We've all filled out our worksheets, and we turn them in to our teacher as we start heading back to camp. It must have been 3 to 4 p.m. by this time. The teacher heads into the lodge with our worksheets and a few moms to start dinner prep for 30 people. Not exactly sure if she had planned on grading them or what, and us children got our free time under the other parents' supervision. They had a nice field in front of the lodge with a volleyball net and a backstop so we could play some kickball. We didn't have a bat or anything, but kickball was fine. About 10 minutes after the teacher comes out of the lodge looking concerned, she asked to speak with Jeff's father in private. We can see them through the lodge window. She is holding someone's assignment, and Jeff's father begins to look a little rattled. He comes out and asks Eric, a student, to come inside. We can see Jeff's father and the teacher asking him about his assignment. Both looked pretty unsettled. Eric just seemed to be explaining it, not upset or anything. Eric comes back out and I ask, "What was that all about?" The teacher said I'm making up that animal I saw, but I didn't. I swear, I just don't know what it is. I never got to see the drawing personally, but the teacher and Jeff's dad clearly didn't like what they had seen. Why were they so upset? It's not like we're all the greatest artists in the 4th grade, but you think a teacher would let your terrible drawing skills slide, you know. A big bell at the lodge sounded at about 6 or 7 to summon everyone in for dinner. A few of the moms had whipped up some burgers and tater tots for everyone. After dinner, the dad set up a fire at the fire pit near the lodge. We made s'mores and sang some songs we had learned in school, and then we told some spooky stories. Around 9, it was time to call it a night, so we put out the fire and headed for the cabins. As I recall, Jeff's dad, who was our cabin leader, had brought along The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, or some variation of those stories, and he read aloud the first chapter or so, and everyone dozed off. I woke up in the middle of the night with an urge to go to the bathroom, so I flicked on our cabin's porch light and grabbed my flashlight, and then I made my way to the bathrooms. There was a decent-sized light out in front of it, so it was easy enough to locate at night, but I always just felt safer even with a small flashlight. I took care of my business and I started to head back toward my cabin. Now, I started getting that feeling, the one that so many people get in these situations, of being watched. I could see the cabin porch light in the distance, but something didn't feel right. I could have sworn that our cabin had been the one right next to the cabin whose porch light was on, and that cabin, whose light was on, had been unused thus far on the trip. But as it was late, and I left the cabin in such a haste, when you gotta go, you gotta go, I just assumed that I had mixed up the cabins. So I'm walking up to the porch, and I'm feeling creeped out, and I realize that I can hear something, kind of muffled. It's Jeff's dad's loud-ass snoring in the cabin next to the one that I'm approaching. I hear the floorboards creak inside, and then the porch light flicks off, and I book it for my actual cabin. It's only like 20 feet probably as I could hear the death snore. The porch light of our cabin was no longer on. I check it when I get back to it, and it was working fine. It was just flicked off, and there's no one unaccounted for. If it was somebody that was with the group, they were definitely not from my cabin. So I climbed back onto my lower bunk, and of course, the window that my bunk is stationed at is facing right out at that cabin. As I'm trying to fall back asleep over that snore, I swear I could see the interior lights of that cabin turn on out of the corner of my eye, and maybe even flicker a few times. I was petrified, so I didn't look over. Tuesday morning, Jeff's dad had set an alarm and was making sure that we all got up. I tell Jeff's dad about what happened last night. He tells everyone in the cabin that if we need to go to the bathroom, we are to go in pairs from here on out, even if it's the daytime. I hear the faint ring of the bell coming from the mess hall, and we make our way down. After breakfast, we had some free time for an hour or two. Then, our teacher said it was time to go on another hike. She didn't pass out activity sheets this time, and we went on a different trail than the one that we took the first day. This time, she was just pointing out various things to us and telling us their name, and things like how Native Americans use this herb for blank. So some time passes, and we had packed trail snacks with us, so we decided to take a break. I didn't notice it at first, but after we had been sitting around for a few minutes, we started to smell this horrible rotten scent, like I couldn't even eat after I started to smell that. The dads that were with us checked a couple 100 feet around our perimeter, and when they came back, they suggested that we get moving as soon as possible. We never did find out what they saw, but they definitely seemed like they wanted to get the F out of there by the look on their faces. So we get back to camp for lunch within an hour or so. The dads keep glancing behind us the whole hike back, and they make some sandwiches and they grab us some chips. So after this, we had our free play. So me and Jeff are running around doing our 4th grader stuff, whatever we were doing, and I tell him about the bathroom incident last night and the cabin next to ours, and being the ballsy mother that he is, he says, "Let's go check out the cabin." Very hesitantly, I agree. At least it's daytime, I tell myself. We tell the parents we're going to head to the bathrooms real quick. We're paired up, so they let us. We make our way over to the cabin. It appears normal on the outside, but he runs right up and opens the door. "Wait," I yell. I'm still spooked from last night, but he holds none of my uneasiness. He's inspecting the cabin, while I'm just peeking in from the front porch. I see something on the bed nearest to the window, and this is the window that I had looked at last night. I would have been peering into this window from my cabin, is what I mean. There was what I thought was a lucky rabbit's foot keychain, if anybody remembers those. It's weird that someone left their lucky keychain behind, like this cabin is completely empty of anything but that. I get closer to it, and I realize that this is not a keychain. I could see a small patch of dried blood underneath where it lay. I could see its uneven edge of a recently departed, maybe ripped off, but not cut limb. I say, "Jeff, what the frig is this?" We exchange some horrified looks and book it to Jeff's dad. We tell him what we found, and we insist that he comes to have a look. When we return to the cabin with him, it's just gone, but the dry blood patch isn't. He seems a little weirded out, and doesn't think his own son would make this up, but he tells us to go back and play with everybody else. He's right behind us on our way back down, so we join up with the other kids, and he pulls Brandon's dad aside to discuss what we had found. So the couple hours of kickball pass, and it's about time to have some dinner. They made us a bunch of Chef Boyardee ravioli and garlic bread, and as a 4th grader, we're like, "Aw, yes." We repeat the fire just like the night before, and we head to the cabins at 9 or so again. This time, though, before we go to bed, Jeff's dad tells us that if we have to go to the bathroom or anything, wake him up, and he'll go with us. So, I wake up in the middle of the night again, but for no particular reason this time. Well, not in the nature of having to use the bathroom or whatever. I just kind of wake up. Jeff's dad's snoring may have done it, I think. I don't even understand how a woman could sleep in the same room as him on a regular basis. It was so ridiculously loud. I'm not as spooked as I was the night before, though. I roll around trying to get back to sleep, and I glance out the window, and in the window of the other cabin, there is a silhouette, a human silhouette. I scream at the top of my lungs, and it wakes up half the cabin, including Jeff's dad. I tell him that there's somebody in the other cabin, and he looks just as scared as I am. He had brought a machete and one of those giant spotlights on this trip, like 10,000 candle power or whatever, if that helps anyone's frame of reference. He tells us to stay in the cabin and lock the door behind him until he comes back. We all watch in horror through my bedside window as he reluctantly makes the 20 to 30 foot trek to the neighboring cabin. He's got the machete up and ready to swing, shining the light in the windows as he can see from his vantage. He continues to walk slowly up the porch, machete held up, ready to swing at anything. He doesn't enter the cabin, he just shines the light around the cabin from the front door window. From inside our cabin, we didn't hear anything, but suddenly Jeff's dad does a quick 180. He's looking around. He's shining his light at the tree or shrub line. He had heard something behind him. We are all just shitting bricks at this point, and we hear him yelling at whoever or whatever he may have heard or even seen. Eventually, we see him lower the machete, and he comes back in and says that he didn't see anyone in there, but he definitely heard something. I got almost no sleep for the rest of the night, and I didn't hear him snore either, so I assumed that he was just as awake as I was. So Wednesday morning, we're all up having breakfast. Jeff's dad pulls the other parents and the teacher aside, and they discuss what happened the night before, and whatever else that had been going on. Maybe Eric's picture and whatever the smell was in the woods, if they had indeed found the source. Our teacher used the phone in the lodge after they conferred. She made it clear that something unexpected had happened, and told us that she wanted to end the trip that day, but because of some conflict with the bus, we couldn't get one up there until tomorrow. We didn't have any of the regular scheduled activities, hikes, or whatever learning camp experience that we would normally have. After breakfast, the parents had us pack our things from the cabins and move our stuff to the mess hall. We would all be sleeping together in one building that night. We pretty much just got free play all day besides meal breaks, and we didn't have a campfire that night. We just hunkered down in the lodge as it started to get dark. After what happened the night before, I wanted to sleep as far as possible away from any windows in the lodge. Everyone goes to sleep eventually, but once again, for some reason, I woke up again that night too. It was pitch black in the mess hall. Jeff's dad's snore echoed loudly in the lodge. I wondered if anyone else was even asleep. I glanced around the room at the far end of the lodge, and I saw someone standing there. There was a single-person bathroom at that end of the lodge, so I was hoping that it was just someone in line just to go to the bathroom. 1 or 2 minutes pass. I check back, and it's still just standing there. I start to really freak out. I can't even bring myself to make a sound. Even if I did, the snore would outweigh it so heavily. I reach for my flashlight and shine it down there. But now, there's no one there. I lay back down thinking that I'm just overly scared from last night's incident. My eyes readjust and I look down that way again. And now, 15 feet left of where the figure was, there it is again, right by the foosball table. I hide in my sleeping bag, just terrified. It sounds like Jeff's dad's snore is getting closer to me, or he's just snoring louder. I poke my head back out again, and the figure has moved 10 feet closer. I nope back under the cover. The snore keeps getting louder and louder. It sounds like he's standing right above my sleeping bag, snoring, or whatever it is mimicking that sound, right in front of my face. Finally, my vocal cords break through and I muster a yelp. Immediately, the sound stops. Jeff's and Brandon's dad comes walking inside from the front porch. He wasn't even sleeping. He was out on the front porch with Brandon's dad. They were smokers. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, but the bus showed up in the morning. I never knew what that was, and Jeff and I could never put the pieces together. So if anybody knows, please let me know. So, what did y'all think of those stories? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. And also, let me know what you think about the Mandela effect. I always found it to be interesting, but I never really delved into it too much, I guess. I guess I have other spooky things on the mind, usually. Anyways, if you have a story of your own, then feel free to send it in, and it will be in a video. I think there are some people who sent in pictures with an explanation, and those will also get into a video that if the moving pieces come together, there'll be a longer video in October, and by longer, I hopefully mean like an hour or so. So, definitely get subscribed and stay tuned for that. Hopefully. I hope. I wanted to do it last year, but it just didn't work out. You know how things happen. You have plans, and then as you have plans will go awry. So, yeah. Also, I forgot to ever mention this at all on the channel, but a couple weeks ago I had a little weird thing with missing time. This was like the second time, third, fourth time in my life when I've had missing time like this. So I have a lot of friends that live in a city that's about an hour and change away, and I drive this road all the time. It's a highway, and like I've driven it so many times from the time I was a kid until now that I can even like pinpoint certain trees. You know just how it is when you drive on a very familiar highway. So, I was driving back, and there's a part where the speed limit changes from 100, this is kilometers, from 100 to a 90, and right around there was when I kind of came to, but from before then, I remember leaving the city, and then there's just nothing until I get to that other 90 thing, which is about 40 kilometers or so, according to Google Maps. And when you leave this part of the city, there's a couple sets of lights. And I remember thinking it was weird how there was nobody else at the intersection besides me. And then after that, I just blank right out for 40 kilometers. And like, at first I was like, oh, well, I probably just spaced out or just like was speeding or whatever. But then like my gas gauge hadn't gone down, and my like the part of the car that shows the kilometers, I can't remember what that's called. It hadn't changed too much. Like it had maybe changed from like 5-10 kilometers, and so at that point I was a little weirded out. And then I noticed that my windows were up, and if anybody who knows me is seeing this, then you might know that even in the middle of the winter, I have my windows down because I'm just weird like that. And I don't know, I felt weird. I felt like nauseous or whatever. So I just slowed down, put my window down, tried to figure out what the hell happened, and then I just came home and kind of forgot about it. So there's not really any explanation for it. I left the city, I blank out for 40 kilometers. I come to, there's no gas spent, the kilometers haven't changed, and my window's up, which I don't usually do. Maybe I did space out, it was just weird, but that wouldn't explain why I hadn't burned any gas. I didn't mind, to be honest, because then, 40 kilometers with no gas being burned, who doesn't want that? But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you had a similar experience, then definitely let me know. And until then, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, thank you for listening to me ramble at the end of the video, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.